Well, when I was in university, before I transferred to Bible college, I took an education class. And in this education class, I had the opportunity to do a practicum where I observed a primary school teacher and her class. And even though I didn't end up pursuing education as a career, I still look back on that experience and I remember how much I learned just by watching that teacher. There was one phrase in particular that still stands out in my memory. I remember the first time I heard her use this phrase in her classroom. The students were practicing reading storybooks out loud. And the way she was having them read out loud was by giving each student a reading buddy, a stuffed animal that they could hold or put on their desk and read to. And this was a great strategy, let me tell you. Every student in the class just lit up when they knew it was time to practice reading because they knew they were going to get a reading buddy. And so the teacher would bring out her collection of reading buddies, this huge box of stuffed animals, and there was every animal in there you could think of. Cats, dogs, monkeys, horses, bunnies, unicorns, that was a favorite. It was quite the collection. And she'd bring out this box and hand out a reading buddy one by one to each student. And I bet you can guess what happened next. One by one, the students started complaining. I wanted the bunny. How come he got my monkey? Teacher, I told you I wanted the kitty, not the puppy. I remember watching this teacher to see what her reaction would be. And I marveled at how calm she stayed as each student pleaded their case in front for the stuffed animal that they wanted. She stood at the front of the classroom and she waited, and she waited, and she waited. And eventually the class got quiet and a little confused. And when they were ready to listen, this is what she said. You get what you get, and you don't get upset. You get what you get, and you don't get upset. What she was trying to teach these kids was contentment, the ability to be happy with what they had been given and to not look at what their friend had. This teacher was giving these kids an opportunity to learn contentment early on in life when the thing they wanted most in the whole world was a different stuffed animal reading buddy. She was giving them this opportunity to learn contentment with what they had been given. Well, today we're starting this series all about money matters, and we're talking about finances, how to manage our money and how to avoid some common pitfalls along the way. And we're kicking it off by talking about two major distractions that get in the way of us feeling content in life. And these two distractions are envy and entitlement. Envy and entitlement. Now, these are probably familiar terms to us. If you're a parent, you're maybe in the process of teaching your kids about these. But just so we're all on the same page, let's define these terms really practically. Let's define them by putting words to what they say to us, the internal dialogue that goes on when we feel them. Envy is an emotion. When we feel envy, we think, I want what they have. But entitlement is a mentality or a mindset. When we are entitled, we think, I deserve to have what I want. Envy and entitlement are major distractions that can cause us to get off course in our money management, because what's really at the heart of these distractions is discontentment. Discontentment, or the feeling of not having enough, drives us to look for ways to self-soothe and cover up the emptiness that we feel. And more often than not, we wind up using money, whether we have it in the moment or we borrow it, to try to pacify that feeling. What's worse is that envy and entitlement cause us to be extraordinarily self-centered. They distract us from what we have by making us focus on what we don't have and what we think we deserve. So how do we stay focused on growing in contentment and resist envy and entitlement so that we can spend and earn our money for the right reasons? Well, to answer that question, we're going to look to the Bible, to a section of verses that touch on both envy and entitlement. And the reason we're looking to the Bible is because it's kind of like God's handbook for life. The Bible is also the best-selling book of the year every year. It has stood the test of time, and if we take time to read and understand it, it will help us to live life better. We're going to look at the book of Luke this morning, and this book is one of the 4 Gospels, which are found in the New Testament, the last third of the Bible. This book was titled after the person who wrote it. So we know Luke was a doctor. So he had that kind of scientific, research-driven mind. In fact, he tells us in the first chapter that he decided to write this book because he had done careful research and investigation into the eyewitness accounts that he had heard in order for other people to hear the truth about Jesus. And you may be listening today and wondering, why bother with trying to figure out the truth about Jesus at all? In fact, why trust that he has to say what he has to say through the Bible? Well, first of all, that's a great question. And if you are here checking out God today, I want you to know that you've come to the right place. This place was built for you. I don't know where you're at with this question this morning, but I trust what Jesus has to say because I don't know many people who predict their own death and resurrection and then actually pull it off. So personally, I'm inclined to believe anyone who can do that. And Luke was obviously convinced of this as well because he poured time and effort into researching and recording the life and ministry of Jesus. So in this passage from Luke, Jesus is teaching a crowd of people when somebody interrupts him. Let's read this, Luke 12:13. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." So we don't know exactly who this person is, but we do know that he's been listening to Jesus teach, and in this moment he felt the need to speak up and blurt out his request. Tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. We can assume that this man's brother had recently come into some wealth from inheritance, so maybe their father had recently passed, or maybe other circumstances had come about that made it possible for this inheritance to be claimed. And naturally, this man sees his brother get access to the inheritance and feels like he should also receive some of the wealth. And I imagine, that the whole time he's been listening to Jesus speak, which probably had been for a while, he had been stewing on this issue. Have you ever done that? You're somewhere doing something, but your mind is elsewhere, stewing and thinking about something that's kind of eating at you. I can just imagine him thinking, well, why should my brother get all of it? I'm a better son than he ever was. Well, maybe we could just split the inheritance. How about that? Shouldn't I deserve something? And maybe this man's brother was actually there in the crowd with him. We don't know. Maybe they were standing side by side and kind of arguing under their breath as Jesus was talking. Whatever the details were, though, this man reached this point where he could not hold it in any longer, and he just blurts out this request to Jesus. What was the cause of this outburst? You've probably figured it out. It was the man's envy of his brother. He felt it wasn't fair that his brother would be given that whole inheritance. He too deserved a portion of the wealth. Remember, envy is that voice inside your head that says, I want what they have. It's that feeling of deep discontentment or longing that you feel you lack. Envy can affect us in so many ways. Sometimes it can cause that direct conflict like it did with this man and his brother. And sometimes it can be a little bit more subliminal. It can cause us to even compete with others who don't even know there's a competition. It could be with a coworker who has what you feel is a better position than you, and you just feel like you should really have their job. You do a way better job than they're doing. And so you work harder and harder every day, hoping that someone will notice and promote you. It might be a sibling, the golden child in the family, who's always had the approval and the affirmation of your parents. No matter how many hours you work or how nice your car is or how big your paycheck is, you just never feel like you're going to get that attention from them. It might be your friend who always seems to have a bigger house or more property or more toys than you do, and their family just looks happier than yours does. You just keep thinking, If I could just get more of whatever they have, maybe I would be happier too. And all of a sudden, that nagging feeling of wanting more is dictating our attitudes and our behaviors. Envy gains control and begins to dictate how we earn and how we spend our money. Envy is a sneaky and manipulative emotion. It's tricky to identify because it's often a secretly held emotion. If you're envious of someone, it's unlikely that you'll admit it to anyone, except maybe to someone else who might also be envious of that person, right? It's not usually something that we say out loud, and whether the people we are envious of know it or not, it very commonly causes breakdown in the relationship. Envy creeps its way into our thought patterns, our beliefs about ourselves, and the way we see the people around us. It can color our whole world if we let it. Jesus knows the power that envy can have on us, and in this story, he wastes no time on warning this man about it. So let's go back and read how Jesus responds to the man who's envious of his brother. This is verse 14. Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter, someone who settles disputes between you? Clearly, Jesus is not about to sort out this guy's financial issues for him. But what's really interesting is what he says next in verse 15. Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. Ouch. So not only is Jesus not willing to play judge and jury to this man's dispute with his brother, he makes his point even clearer by turning it into a teaching moment for everyone present there with him. Watch out, he says, or be careful. Don't be caught off guard. All kinds of greed, or we could also say every kind of greed, including envy, could be avoided if we really want to experience contentment in life. He goes on, life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. In other words, listen, if you're trying to find fulfillment in life from wealth and possessions, you're going to miss the point. You're not going to find fulfillment. You're always going to feel like something is missing because there's more to life than that. Notice that Jesus doesn't get into the specifics of whether or not this man deserved part of the inheritance. He didn't try to figure out what was the fair deal here in the scenario. He didn't pull out his calculator or his ancient calculator and start crunching the numbers. He really wasn't concerned with whether or not this man received the inheritance in the end or not. He was more interested in what was going on in his heart. And it's the same for us today as we journey with Jesus. He is so much more concerned about what's going on inside of our hearts because it's from our hearts that our words and our actions flow out of. Another important thing for us to note here is that Jesus didn't say, watch out, be on your guard for all kinds of money, right? Because money itself is not the issue here. Pastor Dallas said a few weeks ago when he talked about economic prejudice that money is a good servant, but a poor master. In other words, money itself is not the issue. It's our desire for money that needs to be kept in check. So Jesus says, watch out for all kinds of greed. In other words, pay attention when you feel emotions like envy. And greed is that deep and intense desire that we have all felt. We've all been there. Thinking about something we do not yet have. And greed is a breeding ground for emotions like envy because it draws our attentions to the things we lack that others have. And greed is driven by this deep dissatisfaction with what we currently possess. And Jesus says, don't fall for it. What you're chasing after will not satisfy you. Be on your guard, because if you're not careful, envy has the potential to ruin your life. Man. And we're all familiar with what envy feels like, right? It's kind of like that. It hits you in the gut. It's that burning in your gut. It feels really gross. It's not something that makes us feel good inside. And in extreme cases, it makes it really hard for us to be around that person we feel envious of. The reason why we feel envy in such an intense way is because this emotion is only felt when we come up short against someone else. In other words, we only feel envy when we sense that we are less than somebody else. And when we're faced with this feeling, we really only have a few ways to neutralize it. The first way is by diminishing the other person. I feel envious of someone's expensive new vehicle, for example. I might start to put it down a little bit. Maybe I'd say, well, I would have never picked that color, or I would have never gone with that make, or that's really impractical. When are they ever going to use that? And we try to diminish that person we feel envious of by putting down whatever it is that they have that we find ourselves wanting. That's the first way. The second way is to elevate ourselves. When I start to feel envious of someone else, I might look for ways to point out my own successes, or flaunt my own purchases, or announce my own career advancements. And this can sometimes become like a security blanket for us when we feel envious. Puffing ourselves up can neutralize that feeling of envy, if only for a moment. But there is a third way here that we can respond to feelings of envy. And that is by developing a deep sense of contentment with the money and possessions that we have and the progress that we have made. I can choose to be content with the car that I drive because it gets me from point A to point B. And I can be content with the home I live in because it provides me with a warm shelter and a roof over my family's head. And I can choose to be happy with the possessions that I have because they allow me to live comfortably. Developing this sense of contentment takes the focus off of what I don't have and onto what I do. But let's be real, this is a lot easier said than done. We can talk about these things, but we really need to hit the practical ways that we can develop that sense of contentment, and we will in just a few minutes. First, let's go back to the Bible, and let's look at what Jesus does after he responds to this man. He tells a story. This is something he's done many times. And this story is meant to help us illustrate Jesus' point and help us understand what he's getting at. So let's read it together. I'm going to pick it up in verse 16. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And then I will store my surplus grain, and I'll say to myself, 'You have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you've prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves but is not rich toward God.'" So this man has a bumper crop. He had a really great harvest from his land, and because of this, he has so much grain to store that he runs out of places to put it. So what does he do? He gives it away to other people in need? No. He divides it equally among the people who helped him bring the crop in? Nope, doesn't do that. He decides to build even bigger barns than he already had so that he could stockpile all of it for himself. And why shouldn't he? I mean, after all, it was his crop that did so well, wasn't it? Didn't he deserve to sit back and relax a while and take it easy? I think if we're honest, there's a part of ourselves that would agree with him. Enjoy it. Put your feet up, eat, drink, and be merry. You deserve to have what you want when you want it. But here's where the story takes a turn. Jesus says that God speaks to the man and calls him a fool. This very night, your life will be demanded from you. In other words, tonight, you're going to die. And what happens when you die? You can't take anything that you've stockpiled for yourself here on earth. Any material wealth that you thought you deserved to enjoy on earth will not accompany you when you die. And this is where Jesus reveals the problem with entitlement. It's that voice that says, you deserve to have what you want when you want it. Entitlement is a mentality that leads us to believe that nothing is beyond our reach. It clouds our judgment and skews our logic, making us chase after things that will not last in eternity. Notice in this story how there's no mention of this man looking out for the needs of his family. He was a rich man, so he probably had a large family. He probably also had servants who were relying on him for food and shelter. And in this story, there's no mention of his regard for anyone else in life because he didn't really have any. He says, I'm going to take life easy. I'm going to eat, drink, and be merry. I'm going to get what I deserve. And that's the problem with entitlement. Entitlement, or that voice that says, I deserve to have what I want, blinds us to the needs of others. It puts our desires above other people's needs and completely eliminates our ability to consider how our actions and our behaviors affect other people. We can all agree, none of us want to be known as entitled, and we certainly don't want our kids to be either, but this mentality can often creep in subtle ways. So what are some factors that contribute to entitlement? Well, first is the environment that you grew up in. The environment you're raised in can affect how you see the world and what you expect from other people. As you grow older, it can affect both personal and professional relationships. Another factor is the way that your parents treated you. Could you do no wrong as a child, or were you held accountable for your actions? Did your parents solve your problems for you, or did they bail you out when you totaled your car or pay your speeding tickets when they came in the mail? The last factor is how you were treated by authority figures. Did your teachers allow you to get away with bad behavior in school? Were they even maybe afraid to discipline you because of who your parents were or how you yourself would react when punished? All of these things can lead to a developed sense of entitlement. Not only that, but it often comes with a major disappointment. And this creates a vicious cycle that we can get caught in, or our kids can also get caught in. If I'm entitled, I have expectations of how life should be, how I should be treated, or what compensation I should receive, for example. And the possibility of these expectations going unmet leaves me vulnerable. When my expectations aren't met, it can lead to dissatisfaction and other emotions like anger and a sense that I've been cheated out of what was rightfully mine. When I'm distressed, I might try to fix the situation by consoling myself. This results in a self-assurance that I really do deserve everything I want, which causes the cycle to repeat itself. Jesus understood this trap of entitlement. And he warns so strongly against it because he knows how damaging it can be. The amazing thing about Jesus is that when he was on earth, he was both fully God and fully human at the same time. So really, Jesus could have been the most entitled person on the planet in the truest sense of the word, because he, being God, was truly entitled to all power and authority on earth and heaven. He deserved all of it. But instead, he lived his life on earth humbly. He put others before himself. He drew attention to the people in society that had been forgotten, the downcast, the ones others had turned away. In fact, the Bible says Jesus, although he was God, did not consider equality with God as something he could use to puff himself up with. But rather, he made himself nothing by taking on the nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by being obedient to death, even death on a cross. Jesus modeled this better way of living. And as we each continue our journey of following him and becoming more like him, he is more than willing to help us and to free us from the cycle of entitlement and the control of envy. Jesus shows us a better way. I have two younger brothers, if you're not familiar, if you don't know. We're each about 2.5 years apart, and so I have a lot of memories of us growing up together. We've always been really close. And I remember my middle brother had this famous line whenever he was told what to do, and maybe you know where I'm going with this, but my parents would say, "It's time for bed, put your pajamas on." and he would put his hands on his hips, and he would look up at them, and he would say, "You're not the boss of me. You're not the boss of me." Maybe this sounds familiar to some of the parents in the room. But I said earlier that developing this contentment is the best way to combat things like envy and entitlement in our life. And I think deep down we all want that sense of entitlement or of contentment. We may even crave that contentment, and we certainly know when we don't have it, but it can feel discouraging at times. It can feel like there are so many distractions on the journey of becoming content with what we have. Your friend might always have more toys than you do. Your coworker may always bring home a bigger paycheck, or there's always someone with something bigger or better that makes us feel less than. But we don't have to let that burning in our gut, that nagging sense of envy be the boss of us today. We can say, "You're not the boss of me. You're not the boss of me." We don't have to give in to that mentality of entitlement and let that boss us around and dictate how we think and act. We can say, "You are not the boss of me." I'm not going to give in to this distraction because I want to live at peace. I want to be content with my finances and possessions because I know that that's the healthiest way to live. This is the way that Jesus designed us to live. And it's the way that he is teaching us to live day by day. And it's a process. Day by day, we can grow more and more content because he is with us in the struggle. This is the support that we have when we journey with Jesus. He is right there with us in the trenches, in the hard times. So as we wrap up today, just want to touch really quickly on some practical ways that we can develop contentment in our lives. This is really where the rubber meets the road. We can develop contentment by learning to compare in a healthy way. We know that envy leads us to compare ourselves with what others have that maybe we lack. But did you know that there's actually a healthy way to compare yourself? Jordan Peterson, who wrote 12 Rules for Life, says this about comparison. Compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today. This is the healthiest way we can compare ourselves. By focusing on our own growth and our own progress, we avoid the distractions of envy and entitlement and practice contentment with where we currently are and the progress we have made. For example, are you in less debt than you were this time last year? Are you saving more consistently than you were in the past? Do you resist impulsive spending quicker than you did last year? These are all things worth celebrating and finding encouragement in. This simple adjustment of comparison can help us to live at peace with ourselves and others. And now you might be thinking, "Emma, that sounds really nice, but when I compare myself to where I was this time last year, I'm not actually encouraged at all. In fact, I'd rather not think about it. Thank you very much." And if you're in that boat this morning, I hear you. It's hard. It's a fair point, and it leads me into our next way that we can develop contentment. Next week, Pastor Dallas is going to be talking about budgeting, and that's another way that we can develop contentment is by building and following a financial plan. This is a key way we can avoid envy and entitlement because it keeps us focused on our own financial goals rather than the accomplishments of others. Designing and sticking to a financial plan can also help us to grow in discipline. It challenges us to keep our financial goals in mind, even when we become envious of what someone else has and feel that temptation to spend impulsively. I've been there. Don't raise your hand. It gives us this balanced perspective of what we need versus what we want so that we can live within our means rather than what we think we deserve. Not only will our financial plan keep our focus off of what we lack, it also reminds us that we need to put in the work of managing our finances to reap the rewards. Remember, money is a good servant, but a bad master. Creating and sticking to a budget reminds us that we need that plan to stay on track. It keeps me as the master and my money as my servant. It ensures that I earn and spend my money for the right reasons. It's kind of like a guardrail that prevents me from spending money because I feel envious of what someone else has, or because I feel that I deserve whatever I want whenever I want it. A budget or financial plan is a roadmap for you to follow so that this time next year, when you look back, you can be encouraged by the choices you've made. Now, I want us to remember as we close today that Jesus is with us in this journey, and he understands the struggle that we face in this life. He loves us, and because of his love, he gives us this better way to live, a healthier way that's free from the control of envy and the destructive cycle of entitlement. It's not an easy journey, but we're not alone. Jesus' love for us inspires us to do our best, and then God does the rest. Let's pray together and ask for his help in all of this. Well, Jesus, we're here today giving you our best, wanting to learn and grow, wanting to become more like you. And so often, Jesus, we find ourselves caught in distractions, caught in cycles that are hard to get out of. And so today, Jesus, we just give our lives to you. We ask for your help in all of this, and we thank you that you give us everything we need as we journey forward. This morning, we just simply recommit our lives before you. We want to follow after you and become more like you in this area. Would you help us as we seek to do that? We pray all these things in your name, Jesus. Amen.